It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
A major policy decision by the U.S. president sends shockwaves through the international community. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. With the announcement that the U.S. now recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, U.S. President Donald Trump took a major foreign policy step. Trump says this will advance peace in the Middle East, but many in the international community have raised concerns. Here with us for reaction from the United States and the Middle East, CGTN's Jessica Stone is at the White House, and Stephanie Freid joins us from Tel Aviv. Jessica, first to you. Take us through what happened today. What changed?
Well, as you mentioned at the top of the broadcast, the president announcing that the U.S. government now recognizes Jerusalem in its entirety as the capital of Israel. He says this is simply a recognition of the facts on the ground. And as you also mentioned, he says he believes this will advance the cause of peace. Secondly, he ordered the U.S. State Department to build the next U.S. embassy, move it essentially from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That's a process we expect to take a number of years. The average time for that to take place, according to White House officials, is somewhere around 3 or 4 years. It can take even longer. And then until that happens, the president, as he did this morning, will continue to sign waivers for a U.S. law that requires the U.S. to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Anand?
Let's go to Stephanie Freid in Tel Aviv. And Stephanie, how has this news been received in Israel?
Well, Anand, certainly on the Israeli leader side, with a lot of positivity, some saying it's a long time coming. Certainly Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu saying it's historic and cause for celebration. On the Israeli critics' side of the fence, they're calling this dangerous, saying it fulfills domestic needs for President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. And of course, on the Palestinian side, not positive responses. Palestinians on Wednesday evening in the West Bank and in Gaza took to the streets in protest, and they're calling for days of rage. Very, very strong response from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who said, among other things, this is an end for the U.S. role as a peace broker in between the two sides, Palestinians and Israelis. It's a violation of international resolutions. It encourages ethnic cleansing, continued settlement, and occupation on the part of Israel. And he is calling for an emergency meeting of the PLO Executive Committee.
And Stephanie, there's also been a great deal of international reaction. What have you heard today?
From the international arena, first of all, in the evening after this announcement, in Turkey and in Jordan, also protests there on the streets. Again, as I mentioned, days of rage being called in the West Bank and in Gaza. Protests expected. Israel is beefing up its security to counter those protests. Internationally, opposition coming from UN Secretary General Guterres, from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, from Lebanon, who said this has pushed back the peace process between the sides by decades. From France's Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister May, and Germany and France are issuing travel warnings to their citizens regarding Israel and the occupied territories. Anand?
Okay, let me get back to Jessica Stone at the White House. And Jessica, what happens now? What is the immediate effect of this announcement by the president?
Well, it certainly won't be the immediate movement of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to take a number of years to find a new location, design a building, build a building, and then inhabit that building. But as Stephanie went into great detail, there is going to be an almost immediate impact on the prospects for getting to those peace negotiations. If you look at just what President Abbas said regarding whether or not the U.S. can be an honest broker at this point in mediating future peace talks, given the fact that the Palestinians believe they've essentially taken a side by identifying the entirety of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Keep in mind, not west or east, but the entire city. And they do not believe that's a contradiction in terms when they also say that the White House says that the U.S. has not changed its position. So many, aside from the Palestinians around the world, are questioning whether the U.S. can be this honest broker and asked whether or not they are concerned about those types of reactions. White House officials tell me there is no upside for any party to walk away on it.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. That's CGTN's Jessica Stone from the White House. And we also heard from our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Stephanie Freid.